Okay, here we are, Swindle Chapter 31, just one more chapter after this. 3 a.m. A black cloud figure opened the Bing's back door and stepped onto the patio. Staying in the shadows, he made his way down the street 3 yards, hopping fences and squeezing through hedges. At the end of his block, he allowed himself the luxury of the sidewalk, but kept well away from the streetlights. The windows were dark, the roads deserted. He could see it now in the gloom, a quarter mile up the avenue. Every day on the way to school, he had passed this spot and made a point of not looking at it. Not yet. Not under the prying eyes of the police. But tonight, no one was watching. There was only Griffin Bing and, he hoped, George Herman, Babe Ruth. The debris was gone, but the stone foundation of the old Rockford house glowed stark whitish gray in the moonlight. At the curb stood the only other part of the mansion that had escaped the wrecking ball, the mailbox, resting on its post. As he reached for the little door, Griffin observed his hand shaking. What if it isn't there? What if some sensible postal carrier had refused to deliver to a house that was obviously demolished? No, the flag is up. It's been up for 3 days. There's mail in here, my mail. He drew out the contents of the box and stared. A free month of Netflix? Wait, there was one other envelope, a smaller one. $1 million letter. He tore it open and dropped the Babe Ruth card into his hand. The floodlights were so sudden, so blinding, that he was frozen in place like a butterfly on a pin. Detective Sergeant Vizzini stepped out of the glare and snatched the collectible from his hand. In that moment, Griffin understood that the eyes on the back of his neck had been real after all. Vizzini spoke the words Griffin had been dreading for 6 days. You're under arrest. They didn't lock him in a cell. They didn't lock him up at all. He sat on a hard wooden chair in the middle of the squad room while Vizzini pounded out a report on a manual typewriter that must have been 100 years old. He knew he was in big trouble, though, because every single officer on the night shift came by to have a look at the kid who took down a house with an Ultratech alarm system and 2 guard dogs and made off with $1 million prize. Caught. Just the word made him shudder. In a plan like this, so many factors were at play. Being caught was always rock bottom. The worst thing that could have happened had just happened. There was no counter move for this, no recovery. This was a major disaster. How many times had he told himself that it wasn't really stealing, that the card rightfully belonged to him? Here in the police station, he realized that argument wasn't going to work for 5 seconds. Griffin had always tried to stand up against adults pushing kids around, but now, under arrest, he had put himself more at the adults' mercy than ever before. What was next? Trial? Conviction? Juvenile detention? It could really go down that way. It was no joke. His one consolation was that he was sitting here alone and that Ben was not beside him, about to share his fate. Ditto Pitch, Savannah, Logan, Melissa, and even Darren. He could not predict what the future might hold, but he prayed he would have the strength to follow through on his plan to take all the blame. Detective Sergeant Vizzini was still typing the same page. The man had to be the slowest typist on the planet. Each labored click was a jarring hammer blow to Griffin's raw nerves. How did I get myself into this? Griffin, came a voice from behind. Dad was a mess. Pajama top instead of a shirt, sweatpants, slippers, trench coat, bed hair. He had never looked better, not to Griffin. He ran into his father's arms, blubbering like a 2-year-old. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. It's okay, son. But it wasn't okay. It might never be okay. Vizzini pulled the sheet from the typewriter and placed it on the table in front of Griffin. Sign here at the bottom. Griffin backed away from the page like it was a live serpent. A confession? Worse. What does it say? Take it easy, the officer soothed. It's just a statement that you found the baseball card inside the old Rockford house. Griffin was bewildered. What do you need that for? There's a lady in Baltimore named Winifred Rockford Bates. She's 97 years old, and she's the last surviving member of the original Rockford family. The card is really hers. So it might be some consolation to you that your friend Palomino is out of luck. And what happens after I sign? Griffin quavered. Then we go home, Dad said gently. What? Go home? Was that even possible? Griffin wheeled to face the sergeant. Really? Vizzini looked stern. I hope you know how lucky you are. Mr. Palomino isn't going to press charges. He wants to avoid an investigation into whether he broke the law when he cheated you. It's a pretty happy ending all around, probably happier than you deserve. Thanks, officer. Thanks a lot. As he and his father walked to the car, Griffin took note of a slight bite in the early morning air, a hint of the winter coming, or maybe it was just the smell of freedom, or maybe it was just the smell. Oh, I just read that. He knew full well how close he was to come to losing his. Mr. Bing pulled onto the road. Funny the way things work out, he commented. Even if Palomino hadn't hoodwinked you into selling that card, it still wouldn't be yours. In the end, it would have always belonged to that little old lady in Baltimore. Griffin nodded, glum despite his relief. It would have been great, though. $1 million, hundreds of thousands anyway. His father sighed. Maybe it's a sign. Money isn't supposed to be easy. I don't care about easy money, Griffin mumbled. I just don't want to have to sell our house and move away. Mr. Bing jammed on the brakes, and the car screeched to a halt in the middle of the deserted street. We haven't even had a chance to tell you. Griffin was alarmed. Tell me what? All that publicity from the baseball card has generated a storm of interest in the smart pick. I've got investors who are going to back me through the whole process. Griffin stared at his father. You mean... We're not selling the house anymore. We're going to be just fine.